On the morning of October 27th, the body of Dr. Charles Miller was discovered in a quiet suburb of Nashville, a discovery that would turn many people's lives upside down and reveal the terrifying truth about what a person entrusted with trust is capable of. Detective Henry Davis parked his patrol car near a 2-story house on Maple Street and took a deep breath. In his 15 years with the Homicide Division, he had seen a lot, but each new case still made him brace himself internally. A second car pulled up nearby, and his partner, Detective Nancy Taylor, got out. A middle-aged woman with short black hair and piercing brown eyes, she was known for her methodical approach and ability to notice details that others missed. "What do we have?" Nancy asked, zipping up her jacket. It was a cool October morning, and November was already in the air. Dr. Charles Miller, 45 years old, gynecologist, found dead in his own garden around 7 in the morning, Henry replied, checking his notes. Single gunshot wound to the chest. His wife was home when it happened. They walked through the gate and headed to the back of the house, where forensic investigators were already at work. The house was solid, brick, with a well-kept lawn and neat flower beds, clearly the home of a man who earned well and valued order. In the garden, next to a small gazebo, lay the body of a middle-aged man. Dr. Miller was dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a sweater. He was lying on his back with his arms outstretched, and the expression on his face was more surprised than frightened. Henry bent down to examine the scene. "Looks like he knew the shooter," he remarked. "No signs of a struggle. His arms aren't raised in defense. Most likely, the victim didn't expect the attack." Nancy nodded, making notes in her notebook. "Judging by the position of the body, the shooter was about 5 meters from here, near that group of bushes. The shot was fired from close range, but not point blank." The forensic expert looked up from his camera. "Preliminary time of death is between 9 and 11 o'clock last night. I'll be more precise after the autopsy." The detectives walked around the body, examining the surroundings. The garden was spacious, with several fruit trees and well-tended flower beds. A high fence separated the property from the neighboring houses, creating privacy. This explained why no one had seen what was happening. "Let's go talk to the wife," Nancy suggested. Gloria Miller met them in the living room. The woman, in her early 40s, neatly dressed even at such a difficult moment, sat on the sofa, clutching a cup of tea in her hands. Her eyes were red from crying, but she held herself with dignity. "Mrs. Miller, please accept our condolences," Henry began softly. "We understand how difficult this is, but we need to ask you a few questions." Gloria nodded. "I understand. I want you to find the person who did this." "Tell us about last night," Nancy asked, settling into the chair opposite her. "What happened before the incident?" Gloria put down her cup and gathered her thoughts. "We had dinner around 7. Charles was his usual self, a little tired after work, but nothing out of the ordinary. We watched the news, and he looked through some medical journals. Around 9:30, he got a phone call." "Who called?" Henry asked. "I don't know. Charles picked up the phone, said only hello and yes, it's me." Then he was silent, listening. I was in the kitchen washing the dishes, so I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I noticed that he became tense. "What did he say after the call?" "He said he had to go out for a few minutes. That someone was waiting for him in the garden. I was surprised. Who could be coming so late? But Charles sometimes consulted with patients outside of office hours, especially if the case was delicate." Nancy wrote down every word. "And what happened next?" "He went out the back door." I continued cleaning the kitchen. 10 minutes later, I heard a gunshot. At first, I thought it was a firecracker or something like that, but the sound was strange. I looked out the window but didn't see anything. Then I decided to check and went out into the garden. Gloria paused, fighting back tears. Henry waited, giving her time to compose herself. "I saw Charles. He was lying near the gazebo. I knew right away that he was dead. There was no one else in the yard. I called the police immediately. Did you hear the sound of a car? Voices? Footsteps? Nancy asked. No, nothing. Whoever it was, they left very quietly. Or left before I went outside. Mrs. Miller, did your husband have any enemies? Maybe dissatisfied patients? Problems with colleagues? Gloria shook her head. Charles was a very professional doctor. Sometimes there were complaints about the results of treatment, but nothing serious. He worked mainly with women, dealing with sensitive issues. His patients respected him. What about his personal life? Debts? Conflicts? Everything was fine with us. We've been married for 18 years. Of course, like in any marriage, there were disagreements, but nothing serious. There were no financial problems. The clinic brought in a good income. The detectives asked a few more questions, but did not obtain any new information. Gloria sincerely did not understand who could have wanted her husband dead. After talking to the widow, Henry and Nancy decided to interview the neighbors. The houses on either side of the Millers' property were close together, but high fences and thick vegetation limited the view. An elderly couple, Robert and Dorothy Adams, lived on the left. 70-year-old Robert was retired, and his wife tended the garden. They were home last night but didn't notice anything suspicious. We go to bed early, Dorothy explained, inviting the detectives into the house. We were in bed by 9. The TV was on. We didn't hear a shot. Have you noticed anything unusual around the Millers' house lately? Strangers, cars. Robert thought for a moment. No, nothing out of the ordinary. Dr. Miller lived a quiet life. Sometimes patients would come to see him, but not late at night. A young family lived next door, elementary school teacher Kevin Brown, his wife Mona Haya, and their 2 small children. They were also at home, but busy with the children and didn't hear anything until the police arrived in the morning. Dr. Miller seemed like a nice neighbor, said Monica. We didn't really talk much, just said hello over the fence. He seemed like a serious man, always responding politely to greetings. Questioning other neighbors also yielded no results. Most were either asleep or watching television and didn't notice anything. The neighborhood was quiet, and crime was rare there. After lunch, the detectives went to Dr. Miller's clinic. The medical center was located in a small office building in the city center. The sign on the door read, Women's Health, Dr. Charles Miller, gynecologist. They were greeted in the reception area by a young woman, Crystal Brooks, the doctor's new secretary. The 22-year-old, with her neat hairstyle and professional appearance, was clearly shaken by the news of her employer's death. I can't believe this happened, she said, seating the detectives in a small office next to the reception area. Dr. Miller seemed like such a calm person. Who could have killed him? Miss Brooks, we know you've only been working here for a short time, Nancy began. Tell us about your impressions of Dr. Miller. Crystal nervously fiddled with the door handle. I only started here a month ago. The previous secretary quit suddenly, and the doctor was urgently looking for a replacement. He was a strict employer but fair, very professional in his interactions with patients. Have you noticed anything unusual in his behavior lately? Not particularly. Maybe he became a little more withdrawn, but I thought I was just getting used to his manner of communication. He didn't talk much about personal things. What can you tell me about the previous secretary? Why did she quit? Crystal shrugged. The doctor only said that she had personal circumstances. I don't even know her name. He handed all the documents to me himself, without explanation. Henry noted this fact. The sudden resignation of the previous secretary could be important. Tell me about the doctor's patients. Who came to see him? Mostly women between the ages of 20 and 40. The usual gynecological problems, preventive exams, family planning consultations. Nothing out of the ordinary. Were there any dissatisfied patients? Any conflicts? Crystal thought for a moment. In the month I worked there, I didn't see any serious conflicts. Sometimes women were upset about diagnoses or prescribed treatments, but that's normal for any doctor. The detectives asked to see the doctor's office. The room was furnished with standard medical furniture, a desk, a chair for patients, a medical couch, and a cabinet with instruments. On the walls hung diplomas and certificates confirming Dr. Miller's qualifications. Other doctors also worked in the building: a dermatologist, a therapist, and a dentist. Nancy and Henry decided to talk to the murdered man's colleagues. Dr. Ronald King, a middle-aged therapist, had known Miller for several years. Charles was a competent specialist, he said. We sometimes consulted on patients, but we weren't particularly close. He preferred to work independently and rarely participated in general clinic activities. Did he talk about any problems? Did he complain about anything? I don't recall anything specific. Charles was a rather reserved person. He focused on his work and didn't share much about his personal life. Other colleagues gave similar testimonials. Dr. Miller was a professional, but he kept to himself. None of his colleagues could recall any serious conflicts or problems that could have led to his murder. By the end of the day, the detectives had a general picture. Dr. Charles Miller was killed in his own garden after a mysterious phone call. He had no obvious enemies, serious conflicts, or financial problems, but someone hated him enough to shoot him in cold blood. The next day, Detectives Davis and Taylor met at the station early in the morning to analyze the information they had gathered the day before. Outside, a light rain was falling, and the gray sky perfectly reflected their mood. The case had reached a dead end on only the second day of the investigation. Henry laid out the case files on the table and rubbed his temples. So, what do we have? Dr. Miller was shot in the chest in his own garden after a mysterious phone call. No witnesses, no obvious motives, no suspects. Nancy leafed through her notes from the previous day. His wife claims they had a normal relationship and no financial problems. The neighbors didn't see or hear anything. His colleagues describe him as a reserved but professional doctor with no apparent conflicts. The only thing that stands out is the sudden dismissal of his previous secretary, Henry remarked. Crystal Brooks doesn't even know her name, and the doctor gave no explanation for her dismissal. Nancy nodded. We need to find this woman. But first, let's think logically. Who would want a gynecologist dead? Usually, such crimes are related to either personal motives or professional activities. We seem to have ruled out personal motives, Henry said. That leaves the profession. Maybe one of his patients was dissatisfied with the treatment, medical malpractice, a botched operation, or something more serious, Nancy said thoughtfully. We need to look into his patients. Maybe there's a clue there. They went back to Dr. Miller's clinic. Crystal Brooks looked even more distraught than the day before. The reality of her employer's death was beginning to sink in. Miss Brooks, we need a list of Dr. Miller's patients for the last 6 months, Nancy said, settling into a chair across from the secretary's desk. Crystal nervously smoothed her hair. I can show you the appointment log, but detailed medical records. That's doctor-patient confidentiality. We'll get a warrant if we need to, Henry assured her. For now, we just need names, addresses, and phone numbers. That will help us determine if the doctor had any problems with his patients. Crystal brought a large registration log and began copying the data. The work took about an hour. Over the past 6 months, several dozen women had visited Dr. Miller. Some came for preventive checkups, others with specific problems. Are there any among them who came particularly often? Or, conversely, did anyone suddenly stop coming? Nancy asked, studying the list. Crystal scanned the records. This woman, Rachel Hayes, came quite regularly. And this one, Tamara Griffin, was also a frequent patient. And then, she paused, flipping through the pages. Several women did stop coming about 2 or 3 months ago. They used to visit regularly and then suddenly disappeared. The detectives exchanged glances. This could be an important lead. Give us their names and addresses, Henry requested. First on the list was Rachel Hayes, 31, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. She lived in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The detectives decided to visit her right after work. Around 6 in the evening, they parked near the old brick building where Rachel lived. The entrance was clean but clearly well used. On the 4th floor, they found the apartment they were looking for. The door was opened by a slender, dark-skinned woman with short hair and tired eyes. She was dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a sweatshirt, and looked as if she had just returned from work. "Rachel Hayes?" Nancy asked, showing her badge. "Detectives Taylor and Davis. Can we come in? We need to ask you a few questions." The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes became wary and her lips tightened into a thin line. "What are the questions about? I haven't broken any laws. This concerns Dr. Charles Miller. You were his patient, correct?" Rachel froze in the doorway, and the detectives noticed her face turn pale. She was silent for a few seconds, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small but cozy. The furniture was simple but of good quality, and there were medical journals on the table. It was clear that the owner took her profession seriously. "What happened to Dr. Miller?" Rachel asked, sitting down in a chair and crossing her arms over her chest. Her posture was defensive, as if she were preparing for a blow. "I'm afraid we have bad news," Henry began gently. "Dr. Miller was killed last night at his home." Rachel's reaction was strange. Instead of shock or grief, something like relief flashed across her face, which she quickly tried to hide. She lowered her eyes and clasped her hands even tighter. That's terrible," she said, but her voice sounded insincere. "Who could have done such a thing?" "We're trying to find out," Nancy replied, watching the woman's reaction closely. "Tell us about your relationship with the doctor. How long have you been his patient?" Rachel paused, choosing her words carefully. "About a year. I went to him for women's issues, preventive checkups. And how would you rate him as a doctor?" The question clearly caught the woman off guard. She paused again, and the detectives saw her struggle to find the right words. "He was professional," she finally said, "but I don't go to him anymore." "Why?" Henry asked gently. "I decided to change doctors. Sometimes that happens." The answer sounded too quick and too rehearsed. Nancy leaned forward. "Rachel, we understand this is a sensitive subject, but a man has been murdered. If you had any issues with Dr. Miller, it could help us find the killer." The woman stood up abruptly and walked to the window, turning her back to the detectives. "I can't tell you anything. Dr. Miller he was a bad man, but I didn't kill him." "What do you mean by bad person?" Nancy insisted. Rachel turned around and her eyes revealed the pain she was trying to hide. "I'm not going to talk about it. Find his killer, but leave me alone." It was clear that the woman was hiding something, but they couldn't get her to talk. The detectives left their contact information and asked her to get in touch if she changed her mind. Next on the list was Tamara Griffin, 26 years old, an elementary school teacher. She lived in a more affluent neighborhood, in a small house with a front yard. Tamara met them around 8 in the evening. She was a petite woman with soft features and kind eyes. She invited the detectives into her living room and offered them tea, but when she heard the reason for their visit, her demeanor changed dramatically. "Dr. Miller is dead?" she asked, and her voice had the same strange tone as Rachel's. Not shock, but rather a sense of relief. "Unfortunately, yes," Henry confirmed. "He was killed last night. We're talking to his patients to see if anyone had a motive for doing this." Tamara slowly sank into a chair, folding her arms on her lap. "That's terrible, of course. No one deserves to die like that. But I can't say I'm mourning him." This candid response surprised the detectives. "Why?" Nancy asked. "Dr. Miller was an incompetent doctor," Tamara said slowly. "I went to him a year ago with common women's problems. After his treatment, I felt worse. Much worse." "In what sense worse?" Tamara stood up and walked over to the bookcase, straightening the books that were already standing evenly. Obviously, this helped her cope with her excitement. "I developed serious health problems. I had to see other specialists and undergo additional treatment. It could have been a natural progression of the disease," Henry cautiously remarked. Tamara turned around sharply. "No, it was his fault. I'm sure of it. But I can't prove anything. Did you file a complaint with the medical commission? I thought about it. But what's the point? He's a doctor with a reputation, and I'm just a teacher. Who would believe me? The detectives felt that the woman was also withholding something, but their attempts to find out the details led nowhere. Tamara repeated that the doctor was a bad doctor, but refused to go into details. Where were you last night between 9 and 11? Nancy asked. At home. I was checking notebooks and preparing for class. I live alone, so no one can confirm it. Leaving Tamara's house, the detectives exchanged glances. Both women were clearly hiding something, and their reaction to the news of the doctor's death was more than strange. We need to find the previous secretary, Henry said, starting the car. Maybe she knows what was going on at the clinic. The next morning, they returned to Crystal Brooks with new questions. The girl still looked confused, but she was willing to cooperate. Miss Brooks, can you at least describe the previous secretary? What did she look like? How old was she? Crystal thought for a moment. The doctor showed me her photo in her personnel file when he explained her duties. She was a dark-skinned woman, about 27 or 28 years old, slim with long hair, quite attractive. How long did she work there? I think more than 2 years. The doctor mentioned that she knew all the regular patients well. And you don't know why she suddenly quit? Crystal shook her head. The doctor only said that she had urgent family circumstances. I got the impression that he didn't want to discuss the subject. The detectives asked to see the personnel files. The previous employee's file read, Alicia Carter, 28 years old, education, secretarial courses, worked at the clinic from May 2022 to September 2024. The address in the documents led to a small house in a working-class neighborhood. The detectives went there immediately. The house was old but well kept. No one answered the doorbell. A neighbor, an elderly woman watering flowers in the yard next door, said that Alicia had moved out about a month ago. She was a very nice girl, said the neighbor. Quiet, polite. But in the last few weeks before she moved, she seemed very upset. She lost weight and looked haggard. I asked if she needed help, but she just said everything was fine. Did she say where she was moving to? No, she just said she was leaving town. She was in a hurry, as if she was running away from someone. This was getting more and more interesting. The detectives asked for the address of Alicia's relatives and found out that her mother lived in the same neighborhood. Mrs. Carter, a woman in her mid-50s, greeted them warily. When the detectives introduced themselves and said they were looking for her daughter, she became even more tense. Alicia didn't do anything wrong, she said immediately. She's a good girl. We just want to talk to her about the murder of her former employer, Dr. Miller, Nancy explained. Mrs. Carter gasped and pressed her hand to her chest. Dr. Miller was murdered? My God. I thought. What did you think? Henry asked gently. The woman hesitated, then invited the detectives in. In the small but cozy living room, she sat them down on the sofa and sat across from them. Alicia worked for Dr. Miller for over 2 years. At first, everything was fine. She loved her job and earned good money. But something changed in the last few months. What do you mean? She became nervous and anxious. She lost weight and didn't sleep well. I asked her what was wrong, but she wouldn't say anything. She just kept saying she had to find a new job. And when did she quit? In September. She came home one evening in tears and said she couldn't work there anymore. A week later, she packed her things and left. Where did she go? Mrs. Carter spread her arms. I don't know. She said she had to go far away, that she needed time to think. She promised to call when she settled in, but she hasn't called yet. I'm very worried. Do you have any idea where she might be? She has an aunt in Huntsville, Alabama. Maybe she went to her, but I called, and her aunt says Alicia isn't there. The detectives wrote down all the details and asked for a photo of Alicia. Mrs. Carter gave them a picture taken a year ago. an attractive young woman with long, dark hair and sad eyes. Back at the station, the detectives discussed the information they had gathered. The picture was beginning to clear up, but many details remained a mystery. So, we have at least 2 patients who are clearly hiding something and are not mourning the doctor's death, Nancy summarized, and there's a secretary who suddenly quit and disappeared without a trace. Maybe the doctor really was a bad doctor, Henry suggested. A medical error that led to serious consequences for the patients? Or something even worse, Nancy said thoughtfully. Both women spoke of him as a bad person, not just an incompetent doctor. They decided to issue a warrant for Alicia Carter's arrest as an important witness. Her sudden disappearance immediately after her dismissal seemed more than suspicious. Tomorrow we'll send her photo to all the state departments, Henry said, and we'll check the bus stations and the airport. If she really left for another state, she left traces. The breakthrough in the case came 3 days after Alicia Carter was declared wanted. The call came from the police station in the small town of Decatur in northern Alabama. Local patrol officers noticed a woman matching the description at a roadside motel. Detectives Davis and Taylor left for Alabama early in the morning, covering the 200-mile distance in 3.5 hours. Decatur turned out to be a quiet provincial town with a population of just over 50,000, the perfect place to hide and wait out trouble. The Pine Grove Motel was located on the outskirts of town, next to a gas station. It was a typical roadside establishment, a long single-story building with parking in front of the rooms. Truckers and travelers who wanted an inexpensive place to stay without any questions asked would stop here. The local sheriff, a stocky man in his 50s named Douglas Roberts, met his colleagues from Tennessee near the motel office. "She's in room 12, he said, pointing to a door in the middle of the building. "She checked in 3 days ago under the name Lisa Jones, but the manager recognized her from the photo you sent. She's been quiet, hardly leaving her room." "Does she know we're here?" Henry asked. "No, we're watching from a distance so as not to scare her off. Her car is in the parking lot, an old blue Honda." The detectives approached the door of room 12. Henry knocked. "Alicia Carter?" "Police. Open the door." There was a few seconds of silence, then quick footsteps. The door opened slightly, and the anxious face of a young, dark-skinned woman appeared in the crack. "You have the wrong address," she said in a trembling voice. "I'm not Alicia." "Miss Carter, we are detectives from Nashville. We need to talk to you about Dr. Miller. Please open the door." The woman froze, and the detective saw a look of despair flash across her face. She knew her escape was over. "I didn't do anything," she muttered, but she removed the chain anyway. Alicia Carter looked nothing like the photo her mother had given them. She had lost a lot of weight, cut her hair short and dyed it red, and had dark circles under her eyes. She was dressed in worn jeans and a plain t-shirt, and her eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had been running from something terrible for a long time. The motel room was small and modest, a bed, a TV, a small table with chairs. On the table were leftovers from a local diner and several medical certificates. "Miss Carter," Nancy began softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed, "we know you worked as Dr. Miller's secretary. We need to talk to you about his death." Alicia sank into the only chair, wrapping her arms around herself. "Was he murdered?" she asked, her voice betraying the same strange relief the detectives had heard from the doctor's other patients. "Yes. Shot in the chest at his home," Henry confirmed. "Where were you that evening?" "Here. In this room. I watched TV all evening and ordered pizza. The delivery receipt is somewhere." The woman was clearly nervous, but the detectives felt she was telling the truth about her alibi. Nevertheless, her behavior raised many questions. "Alicia," Nancy said, "we spoke to some of the doctor's patients. They all reacted strangely to the news of his death. And you suddenly quit your job and disappeared from the city. What was going on at that clinic?" Alicia was silent for a long time, struggling with herself. Finally, she raised her head and looked the detectives in the eye. "What if I told you that Dr. Miller got what he deserved? What do you mean? He was a monster. A real monster in a white coat. And I kept quiet for too long. Henry leaned forward. Tell us everything from the beginning. Alicia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the empty motel parking lot. I worked for Dr. Miller for 2.5 years. At first, everything was fine. He seemed like a professional doctor, he paid well, and the clinic was thriving. But about a year ago, I started noticing strange things. What kind of things? The doctor became very selective in his choice of patients. He preferred young, single women, especially those who had recently moved to the city and had no close ties here. And he always insisted on performing certain procedures himself, without assistance. Nancy and Henry exchanged glances. The picture was beginning to become clear, and what they were beginning to understand was terrifying. Go on, Nancy asked. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed that some patients became depressed and frightened after visiting the doctor. They stopped coming in for regular checkups, and when I tried to call them to remind them of their appointments, they refused. Alicia returned to her chair and sat down again, clenching her hands into fists. I discovered the worst part by accident about 5 months ago. The doctor asked me to stay after work to sort through some documents. He went to the bathroom, leaving his office door open. I went in to get a folder of documents and saw his personal medical records on the table. And what was in there? Alicia's voice became barely audible. It said that Dr. Miller had HIV. He had known about it for over a year. The detectives looked at each other in shock. Now the behavior of the patients began to take on a terrifying meaning. Do you think he was infecting his patients? Henry asked. Alicia nodded, and tears ran down her cheeks. I couldn't believe it at first. But then I started watching him more closely. He used unsterilized instruments for some procedures. I saw him deliberately scratching the patient's mucous membranes, causing microtrauma. He was infecting them on purpose. He enjoyed it, and it was always the same women, young, single women. How many women were affected? 5 that I could identify for sure, maybe more, but I knew these 5 for certain. Rachel Hayes, Tamara Griffin, Janice Reed, Valerie Bell, and another girl named Keisha Price. Nancy wrote down every word. And what did you do when you realized this? Nothing at first. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. Who would believe me, a simple secretary or a respected doctor? Besides, I had no direct evidence, only suspicions. But then something changed? Alicia swallowed hard. Valerie Bell died 2 months ago, of AIDS. She was only 24 years old, and she had been perfectly healthy before her visit to Dr. Miller. A heavy silence fell. The detectives realized they were dealing with one of the most heinous crimes they had ever investigated. After Valerie's death, I couldn't keep quiet anymore, Alicia continued. I quit my job and decided to tell the other girls the truth. They had a right to know where they got HIV. And how did they react? At first, they didn't believe me. Then they were angry with me for keeping quiet for so long. But when they realized it was true, that the doctor had deliberately infected them, Alicia shook her head. I've never seen such rage. Henry leaned forward. Alicia, what happened next? Did the women plan to take action against the doctor? I don't know. After I told them everything, we never met again. Each of them tried to cope with it in their own way. I left town because I was afraid. Afraid of the doctor, afraid he would find out about my betrayal, and afraid of what those women might do. Nancy stood up and began pacing the room. Alicia, do you realize that withholding this information makes you an accomplice? If you had gone to the police earlier, Doctor, Miller would have been arrested and could have been prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I know, the woman whispered. I live with that guilt every day. But I was scared. I was just a secretary, and he was a respected doctor. Who would have believed me without proof? Henry took out his handcuffs. Alicia Carter, you are under arrest on suspicion of complicity in the murder of Dr. Charles Miller, and concealment of information about the crime. The woman did not resist. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment. I understand. But you must understand that I didn't kill him. I just told the truth to those who had a right to know it. After completing the formalities of the arrest, the detectives headed back to Nashville. They finally had the full picture of what had happened, and now they had to arrest the real killers. On the way, they discussed their strategy. It was clear that Dr. Miller's 4 surviving victims had joined forces to seek revenge, but they still had to prove it. Let's start with Rachel Hayes, Nancy suggested. She already tried to tell us something. Maybe she's ready to confess. They arrived in Nashville late in the evening. Rachel lived alone, so they decided to pick her up at home to avoid unnecessary attention. The nurse's apartment was lit, and the detectives saw a woman's silhouette in the window. Rachel opened the door before they even knocked. She must have been watching them approach. I knew you were coming, she said calmly. Come in. This time she looked completely different, composed, determined. The nervousness the detectives had observed during their first meeting was gone. Rachel, we know the truth about Dr. Miller, Henry said, sitting down across from her. Alicia Carter told us everything. Rachel nodded. She did the right thing. That secret poisoned our lives for too long. Tell us about the night of the murder, Nancy asked. The woman took a deep breath. We all got together. Me, Tamara, Janice, and Keisha. Alicia told us the truth 3 weeks ago, and since then we've been discussing what to do. At first we wanted to go to the police, but we realized it would be almost impossible to prove his guilt. And you decided to take justice into your own hands? Valerie was my friend, Rachel said quietly. We met at the clinic, waiting in line to see the doctor. She was so young, full of plans for the future. She wanted to get married, have children. And this monster stole everything from her. How did you plan the murder? Keisha called him at home. She said she had an emergency and needed to meet him urgently. She asked him to meet her in the garden because she didn't want his wife to hear their conversation. Nancy recorded the confession. And then? We all drove there together in Tamara's car. We parked around the corner and walked through the neighboring property. Janice brought the gun. It belonged to her late father. Who fired the shot? Rachel paused. We decided I should do it. I'm a nurse. I understood better than anyone else what he had done to us, and I was Valerie's closest friend. Did the doctor say anything when he saw you? He was surprised to see us all together. He asked what we wanted. Then Tamara told him we knew the truth, that we knew how he had deliberately infected us with HIV. At first, he tried to deny it. Then he threatened that no one would believe us. And then you shot him? I told him about Valerie, that she died because of him, and that now we all live with this disease he gave us. He didn't even express regret. He just said we couldn't prove anything. Rachel stood up and walked over to the window. At that moment, I realized he would never be punished by the courts, and that he would continue to ruin the lives of other women. I took out my gun and shot him. And the others? We left immediately. We went home and agreed never to meet again or discuss what had happened. An hour later, all 4 women gathered at Rachel's apartment. Tamara Griffin, Janice Reed, and Keisha Price came voluntarily, realizing that the truth would come out anyway. Janice, 29, who worked as a bank teller, was a thin woman with short hair and a determined look. Keisha Price, 25, worked as an administrator in a small office and looked the youngest of the group. All 4 were arrested on charges of first-degree murder. But the detectives knew that this case would be difficult for the prosecution. The motive for the murder was more than clear, and public sympathy would surely be on the side of the women who had been victims of the doctor's monstrous crime. We don't regret what we did, Tamara said as she was being handcuffed. Dr. Miller got what he deserved. It's just a shame that Valerie didn't live to see it. Rachel nodded. We knew they would find us sooner or later. But we did what we had to do, for Valerie and for all the other women who could have been his next victims. The case of Dr. Charles Miller received widespread media coverage. An autopsy confirmed that he was indeed infected with HIV, and an examination of the instruments in his clinic revealed traces of blood from several patients. The 4 women were found guilty of murder but received minimal sentences due to mitigating circumstances. Alicia Carter was given a suspended sentence for concealing information about the crime. The story serves as a warning about how blind trust in authority can lead to tragedy, and that sometimes justice comes not from the courtroom, but from the hands of those who have suffered the most.